Lincoln Center Dialogue, the challenges of leadership.
We've seen costs of tuition increase dramatically over the last generation in ways that it cannot continue to do so.
When the economy bounces back, will the challenge to higher education as a public good subside?
At the heart of the matter is, do we see the education of everyone as a public good? And can we create a ladder of opportunity?
This program is made possible by American Express and the Metropolitan Media Fund. Here's Lincoln Center President Reynold Levy.
We are in the David Rubenstein Atrium here in New York City to launch a three-part program on the challenges to leadership emanating from and in the not-for-profit sector. And we begin with higher education. Our guests, Drew Faust, the president of Harvard University, John Sexton, the president of New York University. I want to begin with a fairly large question, suitable to the largest private university in the world and suitable to the oldest university in America. I'd like to select two commentators on higher education. One is the president of Wesleyan, Michael Roth, who wrote in the New York Times, "Higher education faces stark challenges, the ravaging of public university budgets by strained state and local governments, ever-rising tuition and student debt, inadequate student achievement, the corrosive impact of soaring inequality, and the neglect by some institutions of their core mission, teaching undergraduates." And then a second commentator, in a wonderful book by Andrei Dobanko, he writes, "Even the wealthiest private colleges now find themselves straining for the resources they need, while public institutions are reeling from the loss of tax revenues on which they still depend. Independent colleges are raising tuition to prohibitive levels and cutting back, sometimes without public acknowledgement, on financial aid. Community colleges, the portals of opportunity for students from low-income and immigrant families, some 60% of all Hispanic college students attend a community college, are overwhelmed, not only by students of traditional college age, but also by adults hoping to learn skills that will help them find employment." I wondered from your own perch and in your own interaction with colleagues whether you find this picture that they paint an accurate one from the point of view of the challenges facing higher education. Drew, can I ask you to start off?
They both point to crisis and difficulty and challenge. But within that statement, there is also a sense of how important knowledge and learning are. So we are seen broadly as critical to the social mobility, the personal development, the economic growth of thousands of and hundreds of thousands and millions of people across the world. We are very much desired. And that's a good thing, as we are in a time when knowledge does matter so much and people recognize how important it is. But we're also in a time, as these quotations point out, where we have a business model for higher education that is under enormous strain and needs to be rethought in significant ways. We've seen costs of tuition increase dramatically over the last generation in ways that it cannot continue to do so. We've also seen a turning away of public support for our great public institutions. And I think there's some fundamental questions we need to ask as a society about this dilemma we face, and those are, isn't education a public good? Don't we need to think about it as a public good? And what does that mean if we recognize that? And institutions of higher education have to ask themselves, how do we control our costs? How do we ask the hard questions? How do we define what it is we do as we look at these challenges ahead? But what a time. It's a heady time as well as a challenging time, because we do have something that is so invaluable to people in the world today. And we have new ways of advancing it. The new kind of digital initiatives that many institutions have gotten involved with recently, edX. What are the possibilities there for teaching? Great possibilities, great need for us, but we've got to figure out the right models in which to meet that need and define what our purposes are and can be in this very rapidly changing environment.
John, you have a take on these broad questions?
The key to an opportunity society, and now I'm going to expand beyond the American context to the world context. Your author spoke principally about the American context, is going to be education. It's the ladder that folks can climb. I would not be here were it not for the education that I received, because at the moments I was passing through, higher education was seen as a public good. And I go back to a world in which the most successful social program in the history of this country transformed the country, the GI Bill of Rights. And it empowered, folks that never thought about college with a college education. I'm here because of a New York State Regents scholarship. And that changed my life, because I couldn't have gone to college hadn't been for that. And that gets back to this issue of what the view is of higher education. Now, at the heart of the matter is, do we see the education of everyone as a public good? And can we create a ladder of opportunity where whoever can benefit from the kind of education that's offered at Harvard or at NYU or the other great universities? And by the way, it's not true that every college and university in the United States is great. There are problems and so forth. It's not one picture. But the key thing that I worry about is, can that kid that has to be found, to which we have to reach to find the star quality in his or her eye, can that kid make it up a ladder so that he or she can get an education at Harvard? And that has to do with a fundamental societal attitude. And unfortunately, I see American society going in the wrong way. And I'm afraid, my biggest fear, and I'll close with this, is that we'll use the new tools that are coming to us to give relatively hollow degrees to the poor. And it'll be the elites. In this city, people pay $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 to get their kids tutored so that they can get into the schools that cost more. Now, what do they know that the poor aren't being told? That's my worry.
So where does this challenge come from? Do you see it principally as the consequence of the deepest economic recession that the country's experienced since the Depression? Is this a cyclical phenomenon? When the economy bounces back, will the challenge to higher education as a public good subside? Or is there something more permanent going on, do you think, that represents this challenge?
There's a point that's in the segment you quoted from Andy Delbanco that I don't think either of us has addressed yet, and I'd like to, because I think it's very closely related to what you're asking. And that is the increasing focus of people's expectations from education on economic benefit, and the effort to measure outcomes from education by looking at things like salary and first job. Now, this is a trend that is in some ways related to our financial circumstances. People are very worried about employment. People are worried about economic growth. But the question of reducing education simply to a kind of training for a first job. What do we want education to be? And it's not just training workers. We want citizens. We want people who are thoughtful, reflective questioners of their own lives, people who can adapt to a society in which the fundamental constant is change. These are the values of our liberal arts heritage, which I am so struck to find being imitated now in China. When I travel to China, I'm asked about that. How can we adapt your liberal arts models so that we will have students who ask questions, who are creative, who are innovative? And I think with our focus on outcomes and the kind of narrow economic pressures and our tendency to measure, we want to see a measurable outcome for everything in this society now. There are things we are losing sight of at the very moment the rest of the world is embracing them and borrowing them from us because they've been so successful here.
We got to get back to the fundamentals that a genuine education is the way we're going to be able to transform opportunity in this society.
Drew, you recently wrote this: in an era in which knowledge is the world's most valuable resource, we at Harvard seek to create the largest intellectual footprint with the smallest physical footprint. Can you describe what you meant by that?
Well, it's a very different set of decisions from the ones that NYU has made. We thought long and hard about the way we could best ensure Harvard's international reach and draw upon the talents of the world and bring those to Harvard, and also make sure that our students and faculty had full engagement in the global environment in which they will live and do their work. So we have 15 locations around the world, mostly offices, research centers, places that help students and faculty make connections and that provide a kind of physical base for our intellectual partnerships in those regions. And we thought that that was the best way to make sure that we could accomplish the goals we had set for ourselves. We also recognize increasingly that a physical campus can deal with a number of thousands of people perhaps, but we find millions of people who wish to have interaction with Harvard's intellectual creativity and opportunities. And so we see this new digital venture, edX, as a very important way of reaching beyond a small physical location to a potentially large digital presence. One of the first courses that's going up under the rubric of edX this fall is a biostatistics course for public health professionals. And this is so has been greeted with so much enthusiasm in India, for example, where public health training is so much desired. And we can see how something like that sort of course can reach far beyond any physical campus we would have been able to create.
NYU's taken a different approach to globalization. Can you describe it and draw the contrast?
So let me try to explain this. Our impetus was not so much about footprint, where we're now out as a kind of multinational presence, but we tried to create, the best phrase I can imagine to describe it in an instant is an organic circulatory system. So we have 16 campuses, and they're campuses, we're on 6 continents, but each semester you look out at these 16 campuses as if they were 16 buildings on campus, and you say, in which continent would I like to study? Then you look at the courses that are being offered there, and you're going to find NYU faculty and NYU courses fully articulated. And then the next step was we opened up a second doorway in, other than New York, in Abu Dhabi, and then the Chinese came to us and we opened a third doorway in Shanghai. So now a kid in the Bronx has to decide, first thing on an NYU application, do I want to enter through New York or Abu Dhabi or Shanghai? It's seeing life not through the window you're given, but the many facets of a diamond, and being aggressive about that. So the shorthand, and this is where I'll end in trying to describe us, just think New York City. We're the first city in the world that can say, in our public schools, every country in the world is represented by kids that were born in that country. You can hear the prayers, taste the food, hear the music of every country by going to the neighborhoods of the boroughs. So that is inherently part of the NYU experience, because we don't have a campus, we just got the city. So this is just an extrapolation about that. Drew, you come to us as a freshman, we're gonna get you out of your comfort zone. First of all, by putting you in this cacophonous university that doesn't unify itself through sporting events and things like that. We have no unifying events at NYU. We're cacophonous, we're complex. Take that on, please. When you get used to it in the dorms and at NYU, we'll send you to the neighborhoods in New York. When you get used to that, we'll send you out. So that's the theory that's behind it.
I want to switch quickly to your roles as presidents of these institutions and the challenges that you face personally. So I'd like to ask you both about what you think your leading challenges are as presidents, both internal and external.
There are indeed so many constituencies that a university president needs to be aware of and serve, and that is a key part of understanding the job and bringing those constituencies together, be they alumni, students, faculty, staff, the city in which you're located, the broader world which is looking at you all the time. How do you keep all of those considerations in your mind and manage through them? So for me, one of the key parts of the job is really to listen to people and to try to see where there's common ground among those different perspectives and where the easy actions are, where the harder actions are, and where to focus in for the really hard ones that you need to make sure you can deliver people to support. The world is changing fast and the pressures on us are changing fast. And so to be positioned to respond to a world that today is quite different from the one 3 years ago, and that's very different from when I became president before the financial crisis. So all of those things shift dramatically.
You've put an enormous amount of emphasis in running the largest private university in the world. You've put an enormous amount of emphasis on teaching, on being in the classroom and devoting a substantial part of your working hours to preparing an actual teaching in the classroom. Why do you do it?
Well, first, I was put on earth to be in the classroom and to be with students. So I may be the only university president in the world that teaches a full faculty schedule. I teach 4 courses every academic year because the faculty is what draws students. But then one can never forget the students and the fact that, you know, part of what we do that leverages what we do, whether it be through the worldwide footprint and edX and things like that, or actually in the classroom as I am with my students, is the multiplier effect. Now, people like us, the 3 of us actually, Mr. President's Bridge, you know, we're becoming rarer and rarer in that we believe in the power of institutions to leverage out. It's challenging, it's intense, it's not for the faint of heart, and that's especially true. You have very contrasting institutions here, even though I would hope that we're both among the finest in the world. Harvard is the platinum standard. NYU was on the verge of bankruptcy 40 years ago. Harvard has all kinds of unifying DNA. NYU is cacophony incarnate. And the greatest part of that cacophony is the effervescence, not only of this city, but of these thousands of people that I call faculty, each of whom, you know, this is why I teach, this is why I write, because I have to maintain the faculty soul. And I speak now to the powerful in this room. My fear is that the trustee class at our universities will lose sight of the fact that as complex as these entities are, you've got to delegate the responsibility to people with the faculty soul that she has, and I hope I have.
I think we have a question. Peter?
Harvard has had the experience in the last couple of years, and Drew has had to work through it, of seeing a reduction in its endowment. NYU, John, is it an advantage or disadvantage to have almost no endowment and have to be able to make do on a pay-as-you-go basis?
I'm going to make a powerful argument here that it is a big advantage to have no money at all, and I'm going to offer Drew a swap. You know, Peter, it's even more extreme than you think, because most programs done on a per capita basis. So financial aid is done, for example, on a per capita basis. Faculty-student ratio is done on a per capita basis. And this comes back to this, how different these institutions are, because we've managed over the last 10 years to triple our per capita endowment. So it's now about $70,000 per student. I won't tell you what Drew's is, but you start by multiplying by something like 25. Okay, so this makes a big difference. But on the other hand, We have endowments that Drew can't have. We have New York City. And in the Global Network University, we're trying to create a structural endowment that might attract, for example, a Chinese neuroscientist that we just attracted, that we couldn't have attracted with a startup package, but we could offer that scientist uniquely the opportunity to be alternately in New York and Shanghai. So, it's challenging, but in some ways, it forces you. It's the process of survival that sometimes can press creativity. So we've got to be, frankly, a little more risk-taking. It's complex, and at a place like NYU, you have to be you have to be nimble, and that is good and that is bad. But I'd gladly trade.
I'm afraid for a moment, Drew, that he's taking back his...
No, I'd include my gift in the trade.
Do you have any comment about the basic endowment question that Peter outlined?
Well, endowments are complex because they come often with very restricted purposes. And we have more than 11,000 accounts in our endowment that provide for some things that have nothing to do with the students who you would count as getting the benefit of that endowment. We see the ways in which endowments can encourage you to limit flexibility, in that you think, all right, here's an endowment, it's going to go up indefinitely, therefore I will bake in these fixed costs that are dependent upon it. And when the endowment goes down, you see that you've embraced these fixed costs. And so I think in general, universities have high proportions of fixed costs because of tenured faculty and buildings and so forth. But I think we're much more aware now of the need to manage our endowment expenditures in a way that gives us flexibility for the kind of volatility that we see. But I do think we understand in a new way how to run an institution in a time of such volatile returns and endowment unpredictability. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I would like to ask the panel about an area I'm involved in, and that's MOOCs, or digital learning, which I'm trying to push my school into. It seems to me you can deliver a product most efficiently, even though it doesn't have the trimmings and trappings of a campus, but you can reach out there to an untapped audience that you could not get to any other way. Would you comment on that?
I'd be happy to say a word about our edX venture, which I've mentioned a couple of times in relationship to our international presence and the transformation of the whole university scene. edX has several purposes. One is to undertake to build a digital platform that will enable us to understand ways of transforming education on our own campus, as well as, a second point, to make the intellectual resources of our institutions broadly available in ways that are quite different from early initiatives in digital education that were mostly just filming someone standing up in front of a class. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about very interactive modules, bringing students together digitally, so it's not just one person online, all kinds of experimental ways of thinking about using a digital presence for education. So we want to improve education on our campus. We want to spread intellectual resources more broadly. We also want to accumulate information based on the participation of students in these courses, information that we can use for research to understand better what's working, what's not, where the digital future ought to go.
Thank you. I think that's what I wanted to hear, your enthusiasm.
This is a new way of democratizing education that is completely revolutionary. I also see it, and this is the critical point for me that links back to things I said earlier, as a powerful search engine for talent. I'm talking about finding that kid that's farther down the ladder through a course that's offered in a MOOC, and then going out and getting that kid, testing for the star quality in the eye, and getting them a T-shaped education, not just an I-shaped education. And I think you're going to see that convergence come out of this effort in MOOC. So this what I'm trying to say is, this is all complementary in my view.
Let me conclude by saying that as a native New Yorker, I couldn't be more proud of what's happened to New York University during my lifetime. There are very few institutions you can point to that have had the growth, the maturity, the enrichment, and the attractiveness to faculty and to students in this relatively short period of time. And it's attributable to a lot of things, but not least to its president, who we've been blessed to have with us this morning. And as an erstwhile professor at the Harvard Business School, I have to say that the excitement inside the intellectual community of Harvard to which I've been exposed is very special. And the initiatives underway under Drew have been very, very special. And thank you very, very much.
This program is made possible by American Express and the Metropolitan Media Fund.